In 1994, when our daughter was 4, we went on a camping trip from New York to Florida. And this was a really big deal for us because my husband was a dairy farmer. And in order to go on this trip, he had to sell his cows. Our plan was to drive from New York to Florida. And in Florida, my daughter Holly and I would meet up with my sister, and we would take the kids and go to Disney World. My husband would continue on driving to a place in Texas called Enchanted Rock Park. This was a really mystical, magical place that had a 425-foot pink granite rock, and it was a sacred Native American place. And he was really looking forward to a chance to be on his own, do some rock climbing, which he hadn't had much time to do. So we were really excited about this trip. And I remember the day we headed out, it was like mid-November by the time we'd done all the summer cropping and we'd got everything packed. And we had a little black pickup truck with a cap on the back. And we had it stuffed with sleeping bags and pads and our cooler and a little 2-burner green Coleman stove and my husband's bike and a big black bag full of climbing gear, his ropes and carabiners and his shoes. And right behind I don't know if you know, these trucks are really pretty little. They don't have a full back seat. So right behind the front seat, there was just room for our personal backpacks. And then in the front, in between the 2 seats, there was just enough room for a booster seat. And that's where Holly sat, and she commanded the whole trip. That's not the right word, but anyway, you get the idea. Directed the whole trip. Actually, it was so crowded that my husband had to move Holly's leg every time he wanted to shift. So you can imagine this. Once we got in there and got situated, we could kind of tell this was really not going to be so comfortable even for 2 hours, let alone 2 weeks. But we were so excited and so happy to be leaving the farm and finally be able, after a whole year of planning, to be on our way. So camping and hiking was not a big deal for Holly. She had been on many trips with us before, and when we pulled into a campsite, we all had our designated tasks. I would set up the tent, and Don would get the fire going, and I can still picture Holly happily shredding the lettuce for the salad. And after dinner, Don would pick up, and Holly and I would do the dishes, and it was really great. Being in such a confined space, though, for so long at a time was, as you can imagine, not Holly's idea of fun, and I don't blame her one bit. But the funny thing is, we planned not to do any interstate roads, and no GPS in those days. So one of us, we took turns driving, but we would pull out the map pretty often and try to figure out where we should go. Well, Holly sensed this little bit of ambiguity, and she jumped on that opportunity to take control back over her life, and she would point in any direction, and she would say, "We're going that way." And of course, when we didn't go that way, she would proceed to have a good tantrum. And this happened more times than I care to remember on the trip. Well, we had also planned on finding some really good local food dives. And one of the places my husband had researched was a place in State College, Pennsylvania that was famous for their grilled sticky buns. Now, I came from a sort of sugar-deprived childhood, and I was looking forward to those grilled sticky buns. It just so happens that the day we were going to go to get the grilled sticky buns, it was a cold, pouring rain. We got out of our tents, stuffed the wet tent and sleeping bags in the back of the truck, and headed to the sticky buns. Well, it was a college town, and it was a college dive, and it was in kind of a basement. So we opened the doors, and the bright lights and the warm, sweet smell hit us. And when we bit into that crunchy, cinnamony crust with a gooey glaze on top, I was in heaven. And I would go back there in a minute. I know it wouldn't be quite the same, but I would still go. And as it turns out, as we realized that we were going to be actually camping in the Okefenokee Swamp on Thanksgiving Day, which is in like southern Georgia, I did something I normally wouldn't do if it was just my husband and me. I wanted to have a traditional Thanksgiving for Holly's sake. And so I went out and did the best I could. I got canned turkey, canned sweet potatoes, canned peas, canned gravy, even canned cranberry sauce. And for dessert, we had like a no-bake cherry cheesecake. And as my husband and I sat down to eat this Thanksgiving dinner, we were feeling pretty proud of ourselves that we had a traditional Thanksgiving dinner in the middle of the Okefenokee swamp. I mean, geez. But Holly was having none of that. She took one look at that canned turkey and she wouldn't even taste it. And to this day, that's what she remembers about the trip. How awful the canned turkey was for a 4-year-old. Well, another place we went to was called Itchytuckney Springs. And that name is just so cool. It makes me want to go, Itchytuckney. You know, I just loved it. And what was cool about this place is the spring called Itchytuckney, or river called Itchytuckney River, started in Alligator Lake. And then it went underground and came up in 9 springs. It bubbled up in 9 springs throughout the park. And the water was 72 degrees year-round, and we decided to take a swim in one of the springs, and it was called Blue Hole. And it was not a big area, but I wanted to swim out to where the water was bubbling up and see what it I was really curious, what did it look like? As I got near the edge of where the water was coming up, it was a little scary because the water was crystal clear, and I kind of like leaned over and like looked down, and it was like infinity. It didn't end, and I felt like a weird feeling like I was actually going to fall into this thing and not be able to get out. But that was impossible because the water was coming up at a rate of, like they say, 750 bathtubs per second. I grabbed onto Holly and I didn't let go of her till we left there. But it was a weird feeling. And one of the last places that we did together as a family was to hire a motorboat to take us out to a little island off the west coast of Florida, and it's called Cayo Costa. It's a primitive little island. They had long sandy beaches, and they had shell mounds from the Indians, and there were wild boars running around. There was one other family camping there, and I was so happy to find that they had a little girl about Holly's age, and they could run and play in the waves, and it made me feel good. I felt like we were depriving her a little bit on this trip. And on the way back, my husband insisted that we behave like tourists and stop at this little island so that we could say we had a cheeseburger in paradise in honor of Jimmy Buffett. And we did. So eventually, Holly and I get to Florida, where my sister is, and we head to Disney World with the kids. Now, we weren't into the rides too much, and she wasn't too excited about having her picture taken with Mickey Mouse. It was okay, but what she really was interested in was that big Cinderella castle that was, you could see it from everywhere. And we were all just like looking at it like we couldn't wait to go in there and just, meet Cinderella. Well, she had a deep, deep disappointment when we found out it was just an expensive restaurant inside. And you could only see Cinderella if you ate there at certain times of the day. We have never felt the same about Disney World since, I must say. So after that, Holly and I flew home. And meanwhile, my husband he drove through Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and halfway through Texas to get to Enchanted Rock, where he could be alone, have some fun, do some rock climbing. And he had stopped and stocked up a little bit because he wanted to stay there for a few days. Well, it was just about dusk when he got there, and he pulled up to the gate. He saw it was closed, but he didn't think too much of it. But then he saw the sign. It said, closed for hunting. It was the 1 week out of the year that this place was closed. As you can imagine, I don't know how he must have felt, but I bet you can imagine. And he was probably just in shock, and he didn't talk too much about it after he got home. But I guess after a while, since he was alone, he had to figure it out, and he rallied, and he went to another campsite for a couple of nights. But he ended up driving home in the pouring rain, and when he hit Pennsylvania, it was a snowstorm the rest of the way home. So needless to say, We had some really deep disappointments on this trip with the things that we had planned. But I was pretty happy because we had escaped from the farm together. We didn't get lost in I forgot to tell you about the Okefenokee Swamp, what else we did in the swamp. But anyway, we almost got lost in the swamp, and the water was so black you couldn't see even a finger below the surface. And I was so afraid that she said we wouldn't see any alligators because it was cold, but I was in the back of the canoe so I could see Holly, had a paddle ready in case these alligators came up, because you couldn't see anything in the water, but we hadn't gotten lost in the swamp. We hadn't gotten eaten by alligators. We hadn't fallen into a bottomless spring. And we had had a taste of grilled heaven and a cheeseburger in paradise. Plus, enough memories to keep us going for 20 years. I think we need to plan another trip.